In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Amen. Well, good morning. It is a stunningly beautiful day here today. Really lovely. I've been out in the garden since about 5, doing something that's, for me, quite exciting, which is filling up the new pond with water. Well, surprise, surprise, with water, not whiskey or gin or vodka or anything. Otherwise, the police, I'm sure, would be having a thing or two to say to me. But filling it with water so that, and with all the new liner in place, this is a pond that is half above the ground, half below the ground. Below the ground so that the fish can sink down into there during the winter, and above the ground so we can sit on the side of the pool and have a look at the fish and dabble our hands and all that sort of thing without having to sit on the ground. So that'll be nice. And the weather this morning was absolutely glorious, really, really delicious. So Jolly and I were sitting out there, well, more than sitting, because I was also digging up brambles around the hive, which is also an exciting thing that's happening today. That is that the bees are arriving today, sometime around about afternoon tea time. George is doing all of that, and having not had a swarm so far, he's decided to buy a swarm, which I think is probably the right idea. I have seen hardly any bees at all this year, so it's necessary to buy some. There we go. Good morning to Ben. I hope you're well as well, Ben. God bless you. And Miss Connie, good evening. I hope that you are sitting by your roaring log fire, enjoying a cup of cocoa or hot chocolate or whatever it is you're having. What are the other things? Ovaltine is very nice. That's very nice having the evening on a cold evening. Helia, good morning. God bless you. I hope that you're also having a beautiful day like we are here down in the East Midlands in Lincolnshire. Okay. Today, what are we doing? We are looking at Acts chapter 27, verses 21 to 32. The other thing about the garden this morning was a whole series of new plants have come up. It's changing by the hour at the moment. There's some fantastically beautiful poppies. They are the darkest purple, really lovely. The purple doesn't come up properly in any photographs. I think the camera must say to itself, no, it cannot be that color. I don't know why camera he have foreign accent, but anyway, he do. Samsung, that's why he has a foreign accent. Makes them so much more ready than purpley, dark purple, bluey, dark purple. Though, I suppose being colourblind, it might be any old colour. Miss Connie says we need another garden tour. Okay, we'll do one. I nearly did one this morning, but then I had plenty of other things to do. I'm hoping that the area around the beehive will be dug over before the bees turn up this afternoon. That's a bit frightening. Okay, so Acts chapter 27, verses 21 to 32. You need to rush off to the kitchen, open up the cabinet where the medicines are kept, and take a few seasickness pills right now, because the story is a grim one. Here we go. So hold on to your chairs, folks, and prepare to do, as an American friend of mine once said, do some upchucking. Isn't that the most ghastly thing to say? Ay. Good morning, Bev. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land, and they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. When they had gone a little further, they took soundings again, found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff. Right, there we are. Verse 21. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss." My first reaction to reading this is to say, well, if I'd been there, I'd have taken Paul and hurled him overboard, like Jonah. Old big head over there. Anyway, St. John Chrysostom also says about this, one is not likely to have a good reception when one chides in the midst of calamity. Especially when you said, "Look, I told you so." It's the most irritating of things, isn't it? Anyway, St. Paul doesn't hesitate to say, "Told you so." More interestingly, really, is something else. After long abstinence from food. Now, it could be after long abstinence from food, i.e., they are fasting. And certainly a lot of the church fathers think that that is what it means. It's one of those constructions in Greek that could mean one of two things. The other thing is this: instead of long abstinence, because the word is poly, which means long or much or many or the many, like e poly, or as we say in English, hoi polloi, the many, the ragtag and bobtail of the world, which is what it means. So e poly or hoi polloi. It's funny the way that is pronounced. Anyway, so it could mean the many had no desire to eat. In other words, on board the ship, which there are over 100 people, many of them simply cannot eat. Why? Either because of fear, anxiety, or because of seasickness. I know it was me, bobbing up and down a relatively small boat, although they were very large for those days, and being sick the whole time, I definitely would not want to be eating. But they have been on this boat for quite a long time by this point. They're still not eating. And within that, Paul admonishes them, saying, I told you so. If you listen to me, you'll be fine. And somehow or other he doesn't get thrown overboard, possibly because of verse 22. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. So he follows this up with relatively good news. The bad news, of course, is that the ship itself will be lost, but the good news is that they themselves will not be lost. Ephemin is the word that St. Paul uses here and also shortly, and it means be cheerful, cheer up, folks. And in the midst of an enormous storm, where the chap has just told them, actually, the boat is going to sink, but you're all going to be saved, I'm sure it would be very difficult indeed to find yourself feeling cheerful. Okay? Why does he say this? Verse 23. For there stood by me This night, an angel of the God of whom I belong and whom I serve. Okay, several things there that are interesting. The first is the angel comes in the night, so there's a storm. It's a terrible storm, and the worst part of the storm, of course, will be in the ooh, that's interesting. Hello, Anna. I've had my train of thought. Oh yeah, middle of the night, terrible storm. The ship possibly going to sink and all the rest of it. And St. Paul, because he's praying, he's not sleeping, he's not worrying, he's not upset, he's not throwing the gear overboard, he's praying. And because he's praying, in the middle of the disaster, the angel of the Lord comes to him, saying, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those things who sail with you." Now, it sounds when you first read this that it's, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You're not going to get swamped by this storm." But actually, "fear not" is a common angelic greeting to human beings. If you think about over Daniel, "Don't be frightened, Daniel." Over Peter, "Don't be afraid, Peter." If you think about the Theotokos, Mother of God, "Fear not, Mary." If you think about the shepherds in the field, the angel appeared to them and said, "Don't be afraid." Okay? So all of those things are pretty important. So there we are. "Fear not," that common angelic greeting. And then he carries on, "Paul, it's necessary that you appear before Caesar." So you're going to be saved. You have to do that. That's part of God's plan. And then he grants him his prayer. Paul has not been praying for himself. He's been praying for the 120 odd people that are on the ship. And he says, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So his prayer has been answered and the people are going to be saved. "Therefore," verse 25, "take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run against a certain island." 26. So again, the same word here, take courage, cheer up, be cheerful. It's not going to be that bad. It's going to be pretty awful, but we are going to crash into an island. So we've got a bit of suffering still to come. So although it is going to be in every way a calamity and absolutely awful, and God is not going to stop the wind just because St. Paul is on board the ship. Same with with Job as well. The ship, the storm continued until Job went overboard. There's going to be a terrible storm, but not to worry, you'll be fine. You're going to survive. Okay, verse 27. Now, when the 14th night had come, so that is 14 nights after they left Fair Havens. So for 2 whole weeks, they've been driven up and down in the sea. And as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. So this terrible storm. The Adriatic is not the Adriatic Sea that we would talk about, which is to the east of Greece. This is the old name of the sea that more or less is between Italy and Sicily, so around about there, somewhere in that area. The Adriatic being buffeted around between there and I guess the Gulf of Venice as well. So all of that area. So basically around the tour of Italy and up the east side of Italy. And the sailors, they're sensing that they're coming close to land. I once talked to a sailor about this, and he told me that even though you are out at sea, you cannot see land. The waves and everything else begin to change. There's a change in feel to the way the sea itself is. It swells in a different manner. And I guess you just need to have that experience of understanding that, oh, this is the way it is. It's a bit like people when they know there's a thunderstorm coming on. They don't need to look at the clouds or anything else. They say, sure as eggs is eggs, there's going to be thunder and lightning later on this afternoon. They feel it in the change of the air or something like that. Okay, they know they're near land. And they start taking soundings, verse 28. And they took soundings and found to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little farther, they took soundings again and found to be 15 fathoms. Now, the way you do this, nowadays, of course, they do it using actual sound, using sonar, but which is very bad indeed for the poor old fish and other things. But back then they used a rope with a rock on the end of it. You dropped the rock down, and when it hit the bottom, you marked it and you pulled it up. The way you did it is you held the rope like this. You said 1, 2, 3, and so on, until you had the number of fathoms. Because a fathom is the distance between your two fingertips, like that. A thin rope between the two fingertips. So it's between 5 and 6 feet, depending on the height of the sailor. Now, that means that the depth of the water there is an orgias in Greek, is somewhere between 100 and 120 feet, depending on the height of the sailor. It doesn't matter really, so long as the next sailor who does the same sounding is the same sailor. Then you can tell, okay, in his fathoms, if he's a little fellow, it's only 5 feet wide. If he's a big chap, 6 feet wide. Very big chap, maybe 7 feet. The distance between his two arms, two fingertips, has got less. And when they take it again, it has dropped down to 75 feet or 90 feet, depending on the height of that sailor. Doesn't really matter, but it is 25% less than it was before. Okay, so a huge drop of 25 fathoms. So in other words, the sea floor is beginning to slope upwards, and eventually it'll end in land on the top of that. It's nighttime, in the middle of the night. The sailors are beginning to rub their chins and say all sorts of things in some Egyptian language, probably Greek actually, saying, oh no. Don't know why the sailor suddenly came from Cornwall, but he did. We're going to crash onto them rocks. Okay? Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. They don't know what time of day it is, because there's no star still. They can't tell from that. They haven't seen the sun for a long, long time. So their sand clock will have run out. And they're hoping that soon at least there'll be sunlight and they'll be able to see. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting the anchors from the prow, so the sailors know that, number one, they're in mortal danger. If the ship hits the rocks, then the ship will break up and they will drown. Number two, they have a skiff. The skiff is a sort of smaller boat, quite a big boat, can fit all the sailors, and this will be able to go above the rocks to the ground, and all the sailors will be saved. Bye-bye passengers. So they know that land is near, and so they try to escape from the boat through subterfuge. And St. Paul will have seen that all the sailors are intending to get onto the boat. But he also knows that in order to survive, they need the skill that those sailors have. And they must, all of them, work hard in order to save the boat. It's not going to be, as it were, plain sailing. The entire crew members will need to work hard. And in this way, they'll fulfill God's will. Another good example, really, of working hard with God, then you can. Working hard by yourself, you cannot. And God won't do it by himself. So with God, all things are possible. It's the same, actually, for saving your own soul. If you work hard at saving your soul, and it really does mean hard. So today we had the examples of St. Peter of Athos and St. Humphrey, St. Onofrios, and those two men worked tirelessly throughout their lives for the salvation of their own souls and praying for others and for the salvation of others. And then God, of course, comes to their aid and feeds them and nourishes them and looks after them, caring for them and bringing them into the divine light themselves. Okay, but if you can't rely on God to do all the work, because he won't. No reason why God should. It's like, when you pray for somebody, well, how much do you care? Are you saying, oh yeah, him? Or are you actually praying, giving your time, thought, effort, and so on into praying for that individual? Or for some time, something. Okay? Verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. So St. Paul is the hero of the day. He realizes what is happening. And for once, the first time now, the centurion and others, they have a good enough regard for St. Paul to realize that what he is saying to them this time round is the truth. And if they don't act with haste, then the sailors will jump overboard, escape, and they will all be lost. While the sailors on board, they have a far greater chance of living. So they chop the ropes and the skiff disappears, and the sailors, who probably are pretty cross about this, then have to work very hard to save everybody's lives. And they have plenty of reason to do so, because they don't save everybody, they themselves will not be saved. And that again is something or other we need to keep in mind. We don't get saved by ourselves. We have to be saved in community. And it's no good deciding to save yourself and go off to some lonely place and be saved. And although you might think, hang on a tick, you just said about St. Peter of Athos and St. Humphrey, didn't they go off into the desert or up Mount Athos and into caves and valleys and crevices in the rocks and stuff and pray? Yes, they did. But they did this for the salvation not only of themselves, but for all of those around them as well. So it is, even though they were by themselves on Mount Athos or in the ravines, they were with everybody as part of the church as well. Okay, the two things together. So usually it's much more obvious than that. A church community is saved as a church community, rolling down through the ages. And a church community or community is lost as a community. If it stops fighting against all that oppresses us, all that is evil, then it will become lost. And in this particular case, we have a good example of that. The leaders of the ship, as it were, the bishops and priests and deacons, must also save all those people within the ship in order for themselves to be saved. And if they can't be fact with this and jump into a ship, then actually probably they would have drowned too. And certainly everybody on board will be drowned as well. Okay? So we are all of us figuratively in the same boat. And all of us must work together to save the entire crew and passengers and others. In fact, in the church, there are no passengers. And in St. Paul's case, they were all of them actually in the same boat and actually had to work together as well. Okay, So there we're going to leave that. There was St. Paul et al. Bobbing up and down in the Mediterranean, somewhere off the coast of Malta, feeling seasick, feeling upset, the sailors wanting to abandon them, the water getting shallower and shallower, and at the same time coming closer to their rescue, and at the same time coming closer to the calamity which is going to overwhelm them, and so it'll be a nervous time for them all. Sometimes people ask me about the end of the world. They say things like, oh yeah, I'm looking forward to the second coming of the Lord. If you read about the second coming of the Lord, anything the Lord himself says about it, it is a terrifying time, truly terrifying, a time of terrible tribulation, of anxiety, of people wishing they had fled to the hills, of women who are terrified because they have babies, usually a blessing. But in this particular case here, something that is horrific, where people say, mountains fall upon me. And at the end of all of that, then there comes the second coming. So it's a similar sort of feeling here. We're coming to the end of this particular book, and they're coming to the end of this terrible, ghastly journey, which is in so many ways symbolic of the Christian journey, being blown around, of having to maintain faith, of fasting, of prayer, of fighting against insuperable odds, and even losing everything, but in the end, saving your life. Okay, there we are. Okie dokie. We will pray for the newly departed Wendy. May the Lord grant her memory eternal. For Alban, Richard, and for David, and also for Jane, who has cancer, for Hilary, who has cancer, for Carol, who is the mother of Thecla, for Joseph, and for Simon, for Daniel, who continues to improve, for Nicoletta, for Hector, who's asked for our prayers, for Peter and Virginie as well. May the Lord grant them health and salvation. I've asked you already to pray for Alban. He's in good spirits by the looks of things, but he's very poorly. Right, well, we won't have anything tomorrow because tomorrow is Friday, and that's when people clean the church, and it's terribly noisy here. Hopefully there'll be, I might well do a tour of the garden. We'll see how we get on. Maybe starting off with seeing some of the bees and things like that and enjoying them. And then Sunday, God willing, there will be a sermon and also a live stream from here, assuming that we are saved. Okay, so let's see if anybody has said anything. I taught at your old school. Yes, indeed. God bless you and keep you, Anna. Nice to see you there. I hope you enjoyed the talks at St. Seraphim's, Paul Kingsnorth et al. As one of those was there as well. Cottingham High School, yes, indeed. It was a, shall we say, an experience. Cottingham was a huge school. And it had its very own culture, some of which was a little bit odd. But it was, there were no fewer than 3 streams and 9 sets. So if you're in stream C and set 3 of stream C, you're effectively in the bottom of 9 sets. And the kids in that, there were very few of them, about 15 in every class. And my goodness me, were they difficult to motivate, because As one boy said to another one, said, I'm in set 9 for English, maths, science, and set 9 for humanities and for everything, including sport. He said, so that makes me officially thick, doesn't it? And I was thinking, not so thick that you know that we are calling you stupid and labeling you as being stupid, when in fact you probably have all sorts of gifts and talents that could be made use of. But this iniquitous way of setting and streaming has done you a really, 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 really terrible thing. There's no way to treat anybody. I've always been thoroughly against setting and streaming. It's a wicked thing to do. And it ruins the education of the slower learners, and it doesn't do anything positive for the faster learners, nothing at all. They don't learn any faster. In fact, you rub in the learning far greater for the cleverer kids or the quicker learners or different learners by making them teach the ones that are slower. Okay, much better. So mixability, and it's not harder work for the teacher because they don't have to have any of those discipline problems from the kids that you've been insulting. Anyway, there we go. If I ruled the world, that's what I'd do, but I don't, and they don't. So there we go, Cottingham High School. Good morning to Simon. Bot late, yes, bot late bit, bonjour. You're also in bottom set? I don't think so. Amazing, I am normal, having suffered all those sets, the worst one in maths. You home educate your kids now for this reason, good for you. I think home education is an extremely good thing. You loved it? Or maybe you loved the conference in Walsingham. Yeah, I must say I enjoyed it. Somebody said the other day that everybody laughed all the way through my talk. It's not quite how I remember it, but maybe I got the wrong end of the. I don't know. I hope people enjoyed doing it and found something from it. Anyway, I'm not laughing all the way thinking, what a donkey this Father Philip is. There we are. Joel says, Gefedren. Ooh, what a wonderful name. Mediocrity and communism go hand in hand. Mediocrity. I'm not sure communists, there are an awful lot of stupid people in this world. I met one of our conservative councillors the other day. What a donkey. What a real donkey. Man frightened of the people that he's meant to be representing and pulling a party line to an extent where he couldn't even see what is in front of him. Man who needs fighting, and I think I'm going to start fighting him. It's very wrong what he's planning to do to the people around where I live. Anna, that's very kind of you to say. Right. Okay, God bless you, keep you. Oh, in case you want to know what the ship looked like that St. Paul was in, if you look underneath here now, you'll see that the very first thing that I put on there is a link to a YouTube video with nice things about all sorts of places where St. Paul was, in good weather, it might be said, and some pretty pictures of the sort of cargo ship that St. Paul was in. Okay, right. God bless you and keep you. Your prayers to each other. Bye-bye. God bless you, Joel.